This is my wife. I'm tired of today to have Mr. Dante Honorico talk to us about the Filipinos in the Ventura County community here. He's a member of 26 local organizations, Filipino organizations, and he presently has 25,000 people that he associates with. Is that correct, sir? Yeah. So without further ado, Mr. Dante, come up and let us see what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know whose idea this was, but
It was yours, wasn't it?
on a good Saturday morning, this is a terrible idea.
That's mine. I think.
All right, then you get to feed me lunch today. No, seriously, I'm honored to be here. And I hope most of you are history buffs, because I am. And I'm a student of history, and this is a good opportunity for me to give you some facts about Filipinos here in the county, but also some facts about how we got here. I would like this to be a kind of a seminar type thing, where if you have a question, I would like you to raise your hand and ask me, because I'm not hanging around here after my presentation. I got places to go, better things to do. Okay? Seriously, we have a wedding in Santa Barbara to go to. So. But anyway, I have not studied this before. When someone, I think it was Larry, who called me last year, if I could make a presentation, I was kind of, oh boy, I don't know. But I did agree, so I committed myself to do some research, and hopefully you will be informed well how we got here. But first of all, let me give you some background. How did Filipinos get here in the U.S.? There is an almost unknown trivia, historical trivia, but this has been backed by facts. The first Filipinos who settled in the U.S. came in 1763. Would you believe that? And the reason for that was 1521, Magellan came to the Philippines, and within a week after he got there, he was killed. Right? Well, that was the first voyage from Europe that got to that part of the world, which they call the West Indies. By the 1600s, the Philippines was already under Spain, despite the misfortune that befell Magellan. 3 of those galleons, the ships that he traveled in, were able to come back to Spain. And they were able to go back to the Philippines, the Spanish, and establish a colony there. At the time, the Philippines was predominantly Muslim at the time. So had there been no voyage by Magellan at the time, we probably would have stayed Muslim in the Philippines, or Dutch, because the Dutch were already going to Indonesia at the time, or maybe British. But because in the 1700s there was a very active galleon, that's a drawing of a galleon, the old ships, that, would you believe, those ships plied the route from Spain to Mexico or Havana, and then to the Philippines. And it took them months to get there. But on the return trip, they would go to either Mexico, and then before they go into the transatlantic phase of the voyage, they would drop anchor somewhere in Louisiana. Because at the time, parts of Louisiana were Spanish and French. And at the time, they had Filipino crews. And because the Filipino crews were not treated very nicely by the Spanish officers on the ships, they jumped ship in Louisiana and established a small settlement there. And they then became known, after they intermarried with the natives, as the Manila Men. Around St. Malo, in the marshes surrounding Jefferson Parish in Louisiana. So by maybe after 20 years, they were all over, including the Mississippi Delta area, the descendants. In fact, I didn't know about this because I wasn't studying this history. But I was in Washington, D.C. once. I spoke before a convention of Asian law enforcement commanders, and one of the speakers was David Chu, who was at the time a deputy Secretary of Defense. And he spoke about this. He said, you know, Asians have been here since the 1700s. I didn't know that. And he said, not only that, they were Filipinos. And so after his speech, I went over to him and I said, hey, is that true? He said, yeah, I had my archivists at the Defense Department study that. And they came back and said, yeah, we have the historical record. Anyway, so that was the beginning. What were on those galleons? Well, various goods going to the Philippines. They had cloth from Europe, some finished products made of metal, and when they go back, of course, they loaded it up with spice, because that's what Europeans wanted. And in fact, spice at the time was more than gold in the European market. Bringing this closer to home, during my research, there was a mention in 1783. You know, in 1783, all of this was Spanish land, right? And there were Spanish soldiers, and in fact, at the Presidio in Santa Barbara, there were Spanish soldiers stationed there. One of them was what they call a Chinaman. Well, it turned out he was not a Chinaman. He was a Filipino, ethnic Filipino. But he was serving under the army of Spain. In fact, his name was, because they had it on the Los Angeles census, his name was Antonio Miranda. And he was an armorer, a gunsmith for the Spanish army. From Los Angeles, he moved to Santa Barbara, and that's where he died. He died as a soldier of Spain. In 1898, what was known then as the United States Asiatic Fleet, and this is probably well known to you, came into Manila, destroyed the Spanish fleet, because at the time there was no contest. Admiral Dewey's fleet consisted of mainly steel ships. When they got there, the Spanish fleet consisted mainly of wooden vessels. So the Americans destroyed the Spanish fleet and started to occupy Manila. Of course, the Filipinos at the time, who were already fighting Spain, didn't like that. And when the United States started consolidating the areas under them, that started the Filipino-American War. The Filipinos actually were double-crossed by Spain and the Americans. Because the Americans said, well, you come help us and we will see if we could give you independence. Well, that's not what happened. They occupied the Philippines, but there was a Filipino-American War that started in 1898, and the country was not pacified until 1902. The colony in the Philippines was ruled at the time from Washington through a governor general. And that was the first guy, the first governor general who was assigned to the Philippines. His name would probably be familiar to you, William Howard Taft. He became president. But when he was in the Philippines, there was a story that when he goes to the mountains in Baguio, because the summer residence of the Governor General is in Baguio, where, because it's in the mountains, during the summertime, the weather is cold, kind of like here in this area. It stays in the 70s, even 60s. When he goes there, there was a story, we don't know whether it's true, because of his big hair. He weighed more than 300 pounds. He would go through 6 horses just going up the mountains there, because they have to replace the horses after a few miles. Also during that time, beginning of 1902, the American government, colonial government, started sending Filipinos here to the U.S. to study, because they needed Filipino employees who are schooled here in the U.S. When those, they call them pensionados, they were mainly sent to the Eastern and Middle and to the Midwestern universities. There was no record of them being sent here to California. When they went back to the Philippines, they became the nucleus of the colonial bureaucracy in the Philippines. And so most of those, people who occupied the mid-level administration in the colonial government were educated here. And that's when they started English as the medium of instruction in the Philippines, around 1902, 1903. Bear in mind, the Philippines was under Spain for 333 years. A lot of the people there, especially the educated class, spoke Spanish. In fact, the first university in the Philippines was established by the Spanish. Guess when? When? No, 1611. The University of Santo Tomas, which now they call the Pontifical University, was established by the Spanish in 1611. Predated the founding of the United States. They, of course, in 2011, they had their 400-year celebration. And still a good university. They, in fact, a lot of the doctors here. Where did you graduate now? UST, University of Santo Tomas. A lot of the doctors who came over here graduated from there. Filipinos came in substantial numbers at first during the post-colonial period. They first came to Hawaii because the sugar plantations there needed more workers. At the time, there were laws in the books that prevented Japanese and Chinese workers from coming over. They have already been there. But for some reason, because of the discriminatory practices against the Japanese and Chinese, they could not come over. So their numbers started dwindling. And the plantations in Hawaii needed farm labor. And because the Philippines at the time was a colony, they started importing farm labor from the Philippines. So from the 1900, around 1910, 1907, a lot of Filipinos were imported to Hawaii. They haven't been imported to California yet, but that followed. After the Hawaiian experience, they started coming over here, the Filipino farm workers. But there is a different style of farming here. Over there they have plantations. Here, most of the farm work here was seasonal, meaning they don't stay in one area. So they became migrant farmers. By 1920, there were 3,300 Filipino farm workers. They went mostly to these counties: Alameda, Contra Costa, Glen, Monterey, Sacramento, Santa Barbara, San Joaquin, and Sonoma. Most of those were northern counties. Most of the Filipinos who ended up here, and they are farm workers, came by way of Stockton, up north. Many of them had arrived through the northern ports in Seattle and in San Francisco. At the time, the port in San Pedro was not that active in receiving immigrants. Most of them were coming from San Francisco. Although the majority were farm workers, some of them were highly educated, but could not find any work except as farm workers, houseboys, cooks, because at the time, the other work was off limits to them. Those are the only work that they could find. Not only that, most of the farm workers from the Philippines who came over here were single men. They were not allowed to bring wives or sisters or anybody. They were imported exclusively for their labor. So when they came over here, there was also what they call the anti-miscegenation laws, which means interracial marriage is forbidden. They could not marry whites, they could not marry sometimes even Mexicans, they could not marry anybody. So they remained single, and that's why that period was called the Manong period. Manong is a term which means older brother, older brother. And that term really came from the north of the Philippines, where most of these farm workers came. The first time that they tried to import Filipino farm workers here, they were recruiting in cities, in big towns. And they found out that they didn't know how to work the land. So they moved to the north, where there was a lot of tenant farmers. Farmers who really knew how to work the land and who were used to stoop work. That was called in the Philippines the Ilocano region. Go ahead.
You said that they didn't marry white and sometimes even Mexicans. Did they marry black people?
No.
No, like,
No, because
Really?
see, the miscegenation is stronger in the black
Uh-huh.
people. So no, they were not married. In fact, in 1980, I was working with the sheriff's office. I was in patrol, and I was called to a house in Springville, France. And there was an old Filipino guy there, maybe in his 90s, and really a tragic story, because he has been here since the 30s, and he was unmarried, and he was all by himself, and he was there at Duran's because he has been there for so long that they did not have the heart to just kick him out. But he was already experiencing dementia at the time, and he didn't have any family, not one.
I was just thinking because sometimes other minority people get discriminated, like a lot of black people tend to get discriminated, that they tend to almost have a little, as it were, some kind of sympathy with them or something. So
Yeah.
they tend to marry black people. And
Yeah, because
minorities are just
the black people were the anti-interracial marriage law was stronger among the black people. They were not allowed to marry anybody except other blacks.
Oh, I see.
So,
Sir, discrimination has always interested me for, maybe 50 years now. Because I told you, I married a Filipino when I was 23 years old. I'm 77 now. And my father discriminated against me and her. And this question I've heard many, many times in history where the U.S. government had a blanket discrimination against all Asians. What was the basis, the logic for that when Europeans were coming in to beat the band for hundreds of years?
to be fair, there were also discrimination against the Southern Italians. Yeah, they were because they had black or not very skin, like the Northern Italians. When they first came over, they were discriminated against. They were segregated. They were not accepted in other circles. And during this period, there was a widespread belief that there is a yellow peril, meaning the people coming from Asia, mainly the Japanese and the Chinese, would bring misfortune to this country. The problem then for the Filipinos is because they came from the same part of the world, they got lumped with the Chinese and the Japanese. And in fact, there were court cases where people who tried to marry a Filipino, the courts actually classified Filipinos not as Malayans, meaning from the Malay race.
So
It's the
if I'm understanding correctly, the fear in the government, or probably among the people who maintained the grip of power, was that, as it is today,
Yes.
a lot of it goes on in California today.
No, all over.
Yeah, right. That's the basis
Well,
for it.
and
Fear
it's-
of loss of power.
It's the basis for the anti-Muslim sentiment now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the basis for the anti-immigrant sentiment now. Once they start the ball rolling, they got all kinds of stuff included. And for them, to those people, the more people in that stuff, the better for them. Because they can say, you are not included, you are not included, you are not included. So, the Irish went through the same thing when they first came here. Anyway, they were really desirable here to the farm, to the growers or the ranch owners, because the Filipinos did not require family housing. At the time, you could put 200 of them in the dormitory type housing, and that's fine with them because they didn't have families. And so, the agricultural interests here in California encouraged the government not to allow for families to come over because it would be bad for their business interests. 1920 to the 1940s, a heavier influx of Filipino workers came to California, including Ventura County, because they could not socialize with other groups. They organized their own social and civic groups. along with the advent of social clubs, more Filipinos coming from Hawaii, where they had been exposed to labor militancy, labor organizations. They started organizing farm workers to counteract unfair or abusive labor practices. In the war years, with the declaration of war against the Japanese, many Filipinos here in Ventura County volunteered to fight and were inducted into the armed forces. Some of them were inducted into the largest segregated unit, the Filipino Infantry Regiment, the first Filipino Infantry Regiment. They were inducted into service and activated in San Luis Obispo. It's still there, the camp's still there. And they first were deployed to New Guinea and became a major source of manpower for special units attached to occupying forces in liberated areas. They were finally deployed to the Philippines in 1945, almost at the end of the war. A second Filipino Infantry Regiment was later activated, which also included some Filipinos from here. And after the war, many discharged servicemen came home and resumed their lives. Conditions were better because anti-miscegenation laws were not being strongly enforced, although they were still on the books. And some veterans came back with their wives from the Philippines because they were veterans. The Philippines became an independent country, and the Americans gave them their independence in 1946. But the country stayed very much dependent upon the U.S. A mutual defense treaty was signed by the two countries, which also provided for the retention of military bases in the country, some of them encompassing thousands of acres of land. In several provinces, naval bases in Subic Bay in Olongapo, Zambales, Sangli and Kubi Points in Cavite, that's within a stone throw of Manila, close to Manila Bay. The Clark Air Force Base in Pampanga, which used to be a training camp for cavalry, the U.S. cavalry. It was known before as Camp Stachenberg. They later renamed it as Clark Air Force Base. And Camp John Hay in Baguio City. And there were smaller posts scattered throughout the islands, mainly communications installations. So those were all part of the treaty with the Philippines. The treaty also provided for the United States to recruit Filipinos, but only for the Navy. Only for the Navy. Filipinos were the only foreign nationals who could be recruited into the United States Armed Forces. This is significant because that's why you see a lot of Navy people here from the Philippines. Prior to this treaty, Filipinos were recruited as U.S. nationals only to serve as stewards. That's about the only rating they could get. And in fact, that persisted until the 60s. Filipinos who served in the United States Navy at the time until the 60s could not be anything else but stewards. Throughout the period from the 50s through the 90s, recruitment of Filipinos continued. It varied from 1,000 a year to 400 until it finally came to less than 400 a year. But the recruitment for the United States Navy continued throughout that period. As more and more Filipinos became members, more and more of them rotated through these naval bases here, the CB base and Point Mugu. They brought their families with them to the country, and of course to these communities here. The small communities of Filipinos start to get established in those two cities. Fort Hueneme and Oxnard, there is a lot of them, as you could see, right? Some of you were probably neighbors with them. So this is the first high watermark for Filipinos in this country through the Navy. When they started retiring, many of them chose the county for their retirement homes. The Filipino community started to grow, and because of, at the time, liberal immigration laws, they were able to bring over their families here. Why is it so desirable here? Do you know? The weather.
You got plenty of fish.
Yeah. Do you know this? I didn't know this until I belong to a Rotary Club, and we are one of the main sponsors for the botanical garden in Ventura. This area here has what they call a microclimate. There is only 7 of the areas in the world that is like ours. And it's called the Mediterranean microclimate. And of course, number 1 is the Mediterranean region, right? And the other one that I know about, because we were there 2 years ago, was the Valparaiso area in Chile. If you go over there, because we went on a cruise, as you go to the harbor, it's like looking at Santa Barbara. And when you get off the ship, it's like being in Santa Barbara. The same climate. And then I finally got this information that, yes, they are similar because they have the Mediterranean microclimate. Questions? Remarks? Comment?
Dante, I had a question. How much did the Filipino impact the service, the Navy? About what percentage you think was involved in the Navy? As far as Filipino? How much of the Navy had the Filipino in service?
Oh boy, the impact of it?
Yes.
Oh, great impact.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's.
And it impacted even the economy in the Philippines. Yeah. Just because of the service, they were able to serve in the United States Navy. A lot of their relatives in the Philippines had better lives. You know, parents, their immediate family members, brothers, sisters who were able to get educated just because of the small money that's coming from their relatives here who are serving. You know, it's not much, you know. Those of you who are veterans of the Navy, you know, you guys didn't make that much money, right? But if you send $100 to the Philippines, it's big money. And if you send it like every 2 months, you could send someone to medical school at the time. Really. So it more or less democratized education there. Because education is very expensive there. Even if you go to a state college, it's still expensive.
And I just mentioned that presently we have 3 kids in private school in the Philippines. And the cost is about the same as here, maybe more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they would be better educated.
Than me.
Oh yeah. They'd run circles around here.
Okay.
They were very desirable here, especially Filipino professionals, because remember those pensionados who got educated here, who came back to the Philippines and started teaching and started working as professionals? They established English as the medium of instruction, right? So our textbooks in universities, they're all in English. Our medical books, they were all in English. You go to other countries that have been colonized, like in South America, their medical books would be in German because they had people who went to Germany for those professions. So when they came back, they established the schools and they said, our books have got to be German. Well, in the Philippines, they're all in English. In fact, I credit my English teachers for a lot of the stuff that I was able to accomplish, because they insisted that I know English forward and backwards. Not just the spelling, but also the grammar. Yeah. My high school English teacher introduced us to Shakespeare, to the classics, to Chaucer. I mean, and my college English teacher, we had what do we call, I don't know what they call it here. We had English 1A, which is introductory college English. Second year, we had composition and rhetoric. I don't know if you have that here. Talking to some of the college graduates here, probably not. Because they have a hard time sometimes constructing a sentence. Sometimes it's all predicate, no subject. And our teachers over there, they pound you on the head with that. We have, those of you, we had to diagram the parts of speech and all that for one full semester. That's all we did. And in fact, there were a lot of Filipino very, very good writers in English. More in English than in the native language. Soon, Filipino doctors started coming here in the 60s. When did you come, Doc?
56.
56. And so they probably did their residency here, but they came here already knowing English.
Well,
And most...
our medical schools started
Yeah.
from here. So we have
Right.
actually the licensing. It's only when you graduate from the building during my time, I will have reciprocity from here.
Right. No, not anymore. You know why? Filipino doctors were just as qualified as those who graduated from here. But the medical associations, they don't want any competition. Because if you open it up, there'll be hordes of them coming here. So, and that's how they dampen competition. They in turn, those people, those professionals, when they came here, they brought their family members. And there were some housing developments here, if you would remember, that were dominated by Filipino home buyers at the time. When we came over here, Pleasant Valley over here in Oxnard, South Oxnard, it's probably around 70% Filipino family. The number of Filipinos living the Philippines to the US and Canada increased markedly because of the declaration of martial law in the Philippines in early 70s. That's why we came over. We applied for immigration in 1970. It was approved the same year. But that doesn't mean that you could leave. The processing time at that time was 5 years from the approval of your petition. And we applied as professionals. My wife is a registered nurse. So, 72, Marcos declared martial law in the Philippines. And so a lot of Filipinos left. Some of them left as asylum seekers. And then some of them left because the economy tanked during that time. Before Marcos became president, I remember this because I was in college at the time. Our GDP, the Philippines, was like running around 5%, 6%, along with Japan at the time. South Korea was -2 GDP. And so did Taiwan. Taiwan was even worse at the time. Now, what is the GDP for South Korea? They're probably running around 5. Well, now the Philippines is better, but the Philippines at the time was like -2 after Marcos' time. It really, because he stole so much from the country and took over a lot of industries. Some of the owners of those businesses, they just left. I'll give you one example. There was one steel mill in the Philippines. It was located in the southern island. After Marcos took over, or after he declared martial law, he appointed one of his generals to run that mill. Well, a general doesn't know how to run a steel mill. You know, how could he? So within 3 years, that steel mill was ran to the ground. Nothing. And they had to close it down. Well, that was the only source of steel, locally produced steel in the Philippines. And it closed down. And that's why we came over. We were kind of hesitant to come over, but when we received our visa in 1975, we decided for the good of the children, we need to go. Because you look everywhere, there was no future for young people there. If you are not in the military, there's no hope for you. And we stayed very, very quiet about our coming over here because all that someone had to do if they don't like you is to call. You know that at the time, your passport, the Philippine passport, is not processed first by the equivalent here of the State Department, which over there is the Department of Foreign Affairs. They are processed first at the intelligence agency. It's kind of like your passport application going to the CIA first. Before we left, we have relatives here. My mother-in-law wanted to come over. So she applied for a passport. And she did not hear for more than a year. Just a passport application. And you call over there, they don't know. They won't even tell you that they received your application. Why? It's in the intelligence agency. It's all secret. So my classmate, I was an ROTC major. By the time I had a classmate working in the palace, and he was a captain. So I called him, I said, hey, can you find out something for me? I said, about the passport problem. So he got the name and everything. Bear in mind, this is just a captain, but he's in the palace. I mean, he's working for the president, who was a dictator at the time. So, I was at work one Monday, this was after a week. And the guard called me on the phone, he said, hey, there's an army major looking for you. I said, so I was thinking, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. I wonder who reported me, right? So the major was there waiting for me, he was in uniform, and he saluted me. I said, you don't have to salute me. I'm only second lieutenant. He said, well, I'm supposed to give this to you. And this came from my boss, and his boss was a colonel. I said, well, thank you very much. So I didn't know what it was. Well, it was my mother-in-law's passport. So if you're not connected with them, you're hopeless.
That's the way it is.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the way it was.
Money,
Yeah.
and you know somebody.
Can I mention, back in 1964, when I brought my wife over, it took me about a year. And she actually said she had to bribe one guy with 40 chickens.
Yeah.
That's a lot. She could have talked to me. I would have gotten it down to 10 chickens.
They will let me invite.
I was getting a letter about twice a month. She had to pay this, she had to pay this.
That's why I never became a cop there.
Finally,
I could have.
I hired a lawyer here to go between with me and the embassy here, and that's how I got her over. Finally, they put a little pressure on her. It was going to take forever and a lot of chickens.
How many balloons?
They accept.
In the Navy, starting in the 60s to the 70s, more ratings were opened up for them, meaning they were no longer allowed to, or just allowed to be stewards. So that a lot of them, they were professionals when they joined the Navy. They were able to practice their professions. And then more public service jobs opened up for them. All of this had a profound effect on Filipino immigrants who came over, including me. You know, if they did not have those laws on the books, I would not have been able to join the sheriff's office. With the end of the Vietnam War, veterans came home to Ventura County. And there's a lot of them. A lot of Filipino Americans came as Vietnam War vets. A number of them took technical jobs outside of the Navy, but a lot of them got civilian jobs in the base and in Point Mugu. Now the Filipino American community is between 25 to 28,000 here in the county. They are spread all over fields of endeavor. Not just in the armed services, but also in the medical field, in business, in government, and in academia. Navy veterans who started out as stewards, they started sending their kids to the U.S. Naval Academy. And they came back as officers in the Navy. Do you know of any other resident of Ventura County who became a flag officer in the United States Navy? Do you? The only one I know from here, from Ventura, is a Filipino American And he is a rear admiral now. And you probably know, some of you probably know Vic Mercado is still around. His son is a rear admiral now in the Navy. I don't know of any other rear admiral from here. And there's a whole lot of them who are captains now, and who are lieutenant commanders now and commanders of the Navy. Their fathers, their grandfathers were Navy stewards. Now there is a Filipino-American judge in our Superior Court, and there is one in Los Angeles, or maybe two. And there will be more, because Filipino-Americans have a high rate of graduation from universities, probably better than 80%. So we have woven ourselves into the fabric of this community. We no longer consider ourselves as aliens, and nor should you. And with that, thank you so much.
In the movie biography about Save the